Thank you, Kianush. Now I would like to ask Mr. Rentol from Refugee Action Coalition to address the rally. Please, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Mohammed. Thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak here today. For people who are going past, we're here today to stand in solidarity, in particular with the Iranian students who have been throwing themselves against the autocratic regime in Iran for the last 11 weeks. There has been a heroic uprising in Iran in response to the death of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the Iranian police. In the forefront of the struggle in Iran today have been the students, and we have seen in university after university demonstrations on those universities against the regime, in opposition, in outrage at the killing of Mahsa Amini and the enforcement, the morality police enforcing the wearing of the hijab. It's ironic in many ways, that the hijab, which has become in some ways an indication of the repression imposed by Khomeini after the defeat of the revolution in 1979, has become the symbol of the most recent uprising. But as we have just heard, there is a fine history of struggle in Iran, not just back to 1952 and the students in 1952. We're marking that anniversary today of that that struggle, but even before that, we've seen people in Iran demonstrate against shahs, demonstrate against dictators, demonstrate against the monarchies for their freedom, for fighting for those fundamental rights. And in 1952, it was a demonstration by and large, against the Western imperialism, organising the coup against Mossadegh to impose, a monarch, to reimpose a Shah on the people, on the people of Iran. So I'm very pleased to be here to stand in solidarity with people who are demonstrating for freedom in Iran. As I said, we have seen a very heroic struggle over the last 11 weeks. There's something like 14 or 15,000, perhaps they're conservative figures, of people who have actually been arrested, of political prisoners now who have joined the other thousands of political prisoners in Iran, that are people who have been struggling against the theocracy, in Iran. We've also seen, I think, another step beyond that. We've now seen the first death sentences actually imposed by Iranian so-called courts on people, sentencing them to death for being part of those protests. This is the kind of repression which people have been organising against for the last 11 weeks, and I can't say that too strenuously enough. That ordinary people have faced batons, they've faced tear gas, and they've faced bullets. There's something like 400, perhaps 500 people have actually been killed as the regime has attempted to repress the demonstrations that have been fighting for democracy and fighting for freedom, in the streets of Iran. And that's why it's very important, I think, that we stand in solidarity with the struggles in Iran, with the people who have thrown themselves against the regime, who are arguing and fighting and putting their lives on the line to fight for democracy, to fight for freedom. And I think we also need to observe that struggle in Iran is one of the reasons I think has actually inspired the demonstrations in China. China, in some ways, a similar regime, but many people in China saw what was happening in Iran, saw that struggle of the way in which they had thrown themselves against a dictator and oppressive regime, and was able to begin that struggle for freedom. And I've no doubt at all that there is quite a connection between the struggle for freedom in Iran and the struggle for freedom in China, and the demonstrations in the streets of Tehran and Beijing, that stand up for democracy, and freedom. And I think it's also one of the reasons that we have to be very clear, that it is a matter of getting rid of the Shahs. It's a matter of getting rid of the dictators. If there's going to be democracy in Iran, and there's going to be democracy in China, it's going to be bought by the people of Iran. It's their struggle. It's their fight. And I think the best thing that we can do is organise a kind of solidarity in the West that demonstrates concrete solidarity for that struggle. And that's why we're particularly critical, at least the Refugee Action Coalition is particularly critical of the Australian government. Because they say on the one hand They've said, to be honest, they've said very, very little about the courageous struggles in Iran. Very, very, very little. They've said nothing about the latest death sentences. They haven't stood up consistently for the fight for human rights and democratic rights in Iran. And for that, they need to be condemned. We need a louder message from Penny Wong as the Minister for Foreign Affairs. But the fact is, there is a reason I think that they can't do that. That many of the people who are in Australia, who come to Australia to seek asylum, to seek refugee protection in Australia, are the people who themselves have fought the regime in Iran. And yet the reality is there are so many people, political refugees in Australia, who have not been given the protection that they need by the Australian government. We've still got Iranians in detention. We've still got Iranians who